Hi guys, welcome to this tutorial on question 3 of the November 2019 paper 1 exam, and this is Zoe and the Avalanche. I'm hoping you've read it. If you've not read it, as usual, I'll put the insert underneath the visualizer and you can just pause it to read through. So it's the first part, there's the second part, and there's the final part. Okay, so we know, don't we, that question 3 is always going to be the same question. It's always going to require us to do the same job, which is to talk about how the writer has structured the text to interest us. The bullet points are always the same. So what we will do, quite briefly, because we've already read it, is think about structure tracking. So going down, literally what structural elements can we see, what things can we pull out to talk about. So I would think about the setting, the introduction to character. It kind of zooms in on Zoe's feelings and emotions as she prepares herself to ski. Then we get dialogue between her husband, and it's very, reinforcing of this beautiful place. Then moving on to skiing, and then I'm thinking about the change of focus coming with this pivotal word but, and this is where the first elements of tension come in, because this is where we get the rumble, we get the movement in the snow, which foreshadows the kind of oncoming avalanche. I would then think about sort of use of repetition, repeating the sort of hint that this avalanche is on its way. Return to the dialogue to think about how panic is introduced at this point, and then focusing on her sort of struggle for survival, really, when the avalanche actually hits, and then the fact it kind of ends on a cliffhanger. So this is just my recommendation. I would always do this. I would go through and track it, and in coming up with my answer for you today, that's exactly what I did. That was my approach. I think it helps you focus on the way a text is built and structured rather than the language. Okay, so here's my response. So before you start getting concerned about the fact I've used imagery, which we might think is a language device, I'm thinking about the function of this and how it works in building the text rather than individual words. I know this is tricky, but it's about not zooming in on the language. It's thinking about, it might be about how a particular imagery works for the whole text to build it, but I'm not zooming in on language. So I'm going to say the writer uses vivid imagery to initially depict the setting as being beautiful, serene and peaceful. Notice I haven't gone in and said, the adjective snow is blah, blah, blah. It wouldn't be the adjective snowy, it would be so and so. So focused on setting. This tranquil environment creates a false sense of security. So this is my sort of effects. I'm talking what's the effect of introducing setting. Suggesting this landscape is simply picturesque, not threatening. So this is a more developed comment. Gets me a few more marks, rather than just saying the setting is pretty. The introduction of character, so I've got another structural device here, character, and the revelation of Zoe's euphoric feelings towards the moment builds on the false sense of security. Equally, the timing, morning, and the weather, the sun was up, create a reassuring and safe tone. So sometimes my students say, how do I, it's talking about language. Putting a quote in doesn't mean you're talking about language. Quotes can equally back up what you're saying about structure. So I've got evidence here of the morning and of the timing and the weather, but I haven't said morning is associated with. I haven't zoomed in on morning, so it's not language. So although the pathetic fallacy, which is definitely an overlapping device, you can use it language, you can use it structure. In this case, it's structure. So although the pathetic fallacy highlights the beauty of the mountains, the first short declarative sentence, it was snowing again, could be seen as threatening or foreboding, as there has clearly been repeated and significant snowfall. So again, some effects and a bit more perceptive, that one, because I'm sort of interpreting and thinking about possibilities, particularly that word again suggests. Zoe and her husband enjoy this special moment, and the writer's use, I love the writer's use, it's like my favourite phrase, that's sad, isn't it? The writer's use of dialogue, this is perfection, contrasts with the disaster that's about to unfold. The perfection of the scene is altered by the writer changing focus. Now we know that's in the bullet points, so it'll always be there and you need to look for it. You look for where there's a change of tone, a change of mood, something where there's a shift. But at the edge signals a change for the worst. Initially, that's structurally really, initially the avalanche is not explicitly mentioned, and the writer uses the ambiguous rumble to simply suggest something is about to happen. The rumble is repeated, and the writer then interrupts Zoe's smile with urgent, fast-paced dialogue. Get to the side. Hopefully you can see the way I'm just sort of integrating evidence and structure and effects all the way through here. We're not zooming in like we did for the language question, but we're kind of just going through. I like to go through chronologically, thinking about what the writer's done from beginning to end. At this point, readers and Zoe are aware of the avalanche. The writer then depicts the avalanche hitting and uses complex, multi-clause sentences to create a frantic, fast-paced and confused tone, reflecting Zoe's panic when the avalanche hit. The writer repeatedly uses a subject-verb structure, she pushed, she angled, she was punched, to illustrate her frantic fight to survive and to give readers a tense, exciting record of what happened. At the end, the writer moves Zoe into a state of unconsciousness, emphasizing her danger of death and contrasting with her previous feelings of joy and power. Now, I've said this before, don't you do this in your exam. I just do this so it all fits on one side for the purpose of recording, but try not to do that, try to go over, you've still got more space. Okay, so you can see here how I've moved into even exploring at sentence level. This is more complicated. Subject verb, you know, we've got the pronoun she, and verb, obviously we know what they are. And when you look back at this structure, she angled, she saw, she pushed herself, she remembered. It really focuses on Zoe, the she, and what she's doing, thinking, going through at this point. And I think it just helps to create that frantic sense of her coping mechanisms in this very, very challenging environment that she finds herself in. So, you know, I almost stopped kind of annotating this as I was going through, but you know, you can see where we've got effects all the way down here. You know, it's just incorporated into everything that I do really. And I think as always, when I sort of zoom back out, you know, the number of structural devices mentioned is quite significant, but some of those are quite straightforward, things like then, repeated, at the end, contrasts. You know, you don't necessarily have to go into these sort of much more sophisticated or complex devices. So this would be 8 out of 8, and therefore a grade 9 response to this task. Hopefully you found it useful in seeing the way that you can track a text structure from beginning to end, looking at those writers' devices. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.